Did Indiana join the SEC and I just missed it? Because they lost and their college football playoff chances increased. And I don't think that is supposed to happen. But it's because, just like Indiana, Ole Miss, Alabama, Texas A&M didn't handle their business. And if you are a longtime watcher of the podcast or listener of the podcast, you'll know that I've used the argument that, like, hey, I might not think that Miami is one of the best teams in America, but you know what? They've handled their business. I think you could argue that Oregon isn't the top team in the country, but they've handled their business. Ohio State, outside of losing a 1-point game on the road 3 time zones away, has handled their business. Texas, outside of a loss to Georgia, has handled their business. Handling your business is part of the determination between who is good and who is not. Which teams are most deserving versus best teams. Because most deserving teams, and this will probably be a conversation for a different day. I will always, I think, be a most deserving. That's the argument, right? Is who belongs in the college football playoff? Is it the most deserving teams or the best teams? I think it's most deserving. I think it should be most deserving. The college football playoff will tell you it's the best teams. It's a hell of a lot easier to figure out who the most deserving teams are than the best teams are. And I think when that's what you're trying to err on the side, the caution of like, hey, would we rather have the most deserving teams or the best teams? I would be most deserving. The most deserving teams find a way to handle their business. They find a way to win, regardless of how tough or easy the schedule is. Twice now, Alabama has not handled their business against teams that they're better than. 3 times now, Ole Miss has not handled their business against teams that they are better than. Twice, Texas A&M has not handled their business against teams that they are better than. And that is a recurring theme. Ohio State's better than Indiana, and Indiana lost on the road in conference. And again, if you are it's hard to win conference games, let alone it's hard to win conference games on the road, let alone it's hard to win conference games on the road when you are not the better team. And Indiana didn't get that done on Saturday. That's not some shock. That's not some ridiculous conclusion to come to. Indiana looked outmatched. Indiana looked overpowered. But you know what? If that's the only time Indiana hasn't handled their business in 2024, how do you leave them out? Sure, they don't have any great wins to hang their hat on. They don't have anything that you can go like, well, hell, Indiana did X, Y, Z. But you know what? Neither is Penn State, really. Neither is Texas, really. But you know what they do have? That at the end of the day, and this is assuming that Indiana beats Purdue and that Penn State wins next Saturday and that Texas beats Texas A&M. And that might not be a foregone conclusion, by the way. Assuming that everything goes the way it's supposed to go. 11 out of 12 times Indiana handled their business. 11 out of 12 times Penn State handled their business. 11 out of 12 times Texas handled their business. And when push comes to shove, I'm going to put a decently high value on the teams that handled their business rather than the teams that have shown flashes of greatness. Alabama. They beat Georgia and started the game by beating the hell out of Georgia. Or Ole Miss has a great win over Georgia. And they have 3 bad losses. And Ole Miss had plenty of chances to avoid that bad loss. You throw 2 picks in the final 90 seconds of a game that decides whether or not you make college football playoff. Sorry, you had your chance. Indiana handled their business. Penn State has handled their business. Texas has handled their business. Boise State, outside of a 1-score loss to the number 1 team in the country, has handled their business. Notre Dame, 11 out of 12 times, handled their business. You can argue and complain and bitch and moan and Lay out your case for why the SEC, that their parity, their ability to beat anybody on any given night shows that they are great. But when push comes to shove, when everybody else is able to be successful in this one area, which is win the games you are supposed to win. Because you know what? 11 out of 12 times, Texas was supposed to win, and they won. 11 out of 12 times, Indiana was supposed to win, and they won. 11 out of 12 times, Penn State was supposed to win, and they won. 8 out of 12 times, Ole Miss wins, or 9 out of 12 times, Ole Miss wins. I can't have sympathy for that. I can't say, well, LSU, who's 6-4, that's just such a tough place to play. It's just a tough game to win for Ole Miss, who was supposed to win. Ole Miss versus Kentucky, who was supposed to win. Ole Miss versus Florida, who was supposed to win. Alabama versus Oklahoma. Alabama versus Vanderbilt. You're supposed to win those games. And when you don't win the games you are supposed to win, you only have yourself to blame. You then can't try to drag everybody else above you in the rankings down with you and say, well, wait a second, it's not fair. Tennessee versus Arkansas. You can't blame anybody but you. And those are difficult conversations to have, difficult situations to confront, because you have to confront the fact that you didn't handle your portion of the job. One of the most cliche, often spoken phrases by college football coaches is, we have to control what we can control. And you know what? Ole Miss hasn't controlled what they can control, and that's beating bad teams on your schedule. Same for Texas A&M. Same for Alabama. Same for Tennessee against Arkansas. You have nobody to blame but yourself. And so, if 11 out of 12 times Indiana does what it's supposed to do, and the one time that they are not supposed to win, they don't, I don't think you can keep that against them. I don't think you can hold that against them and say, see, this shows they don't belong. Because you know what? The argument has always been this year, and for a long time before this year, but especially this year, is that the SEC is just so good. I tongue-in-cheek tweeted last night that being bowl eligible in the SEC is like winning 10 games and damn near every other conference, because it's just so difficult. It means more. I'm here to tell you that the idea that Oregon would lose 3 or 4 games in the SEC, or Ohio State would lose 2 or 3 games or 3 or 4 games in that conference because it's just so difficult, is poppycock. Now, might Georgia go undefeated in the Big Ten? Certainly a possibility. But this ain't sunshine and rainbow land. This is the real world, where we have to figure out what happened on the field and take that into account. And so if you're still going to pound the table that Indiana proved that they don't belong in their game against Ohio State on the road in conference game, I don't think you want to apply that, because you know what? Ole Miss would likely look like they don't belong on the field against Ohio State too. So would Tennessee and Texas A&M and potentially Alabama. All of those things are just as likely and just as true as Indiana looked like it didn't belong. When you are one of the best teams in the country, that's how you make teams look. But the one opportunity that you get to prove that you are one of the 12 best teams, do I think Indiana looked like one of the 12 best teams in the country on Saturday? Not necessarily. But do I think they would have struggled to score a touchdown against Oklahoma? I don't. No, I don't. Do I think that they would have thrown 2 interceptions in the final 90 seconds trying to win the game against a Florida team who somehow got to bowl eligibility? Not necessarily, no. Do I think that they could have caught the football in the end zone on a 2-point conversion attempt to beat a bad Auburn team? Yeah, I do. So you might not think Indiana belongs in the college football playoff, especially if you're an SEC fan, especially if you're an Ole Miss fan or a Alabama fan, Texas A&M fan. But you know what? You've only got yourself to blame for why you're not there. And I don't think you can drag Indiana down with you. Time to look at the Sunday Stiff Arm Trophy update. It has not changed. I thought about making a change. I thought about moving Cam Ward. to number 2, and potentially even Travis Hunter to number 3. Travis Hunter is having a pretty darn good season. He's got 11 touchdowns receiving. He's got 3 interceptions. Is not having the and I don't know that this is his fault. If they could get him some run at kick returner, punt returner to improve those, because the poor guy, they don't throw at Travis Hunter. So he doesn't get a lot of opportunities for tackles, doesn't get a lot of opportunities for pass deflections, interceptions. He's got 3 INTs, 11 touchdowns. Is Travis Hunter going to get to go to New York? I would say, yeah, probably. But to me, it's still Ashton Jeanty. To me, it is still his trophy to lose. And thus, I have him at number 1. He would be who I would vote for today if my Heisman Trophy ballot was due. It ain't, but he has almost single-handedly put the Broncos on his back. And when they are essentially 1 or 2 wins away from a college football playoff berth, and potentially as a 4 seed and not the 5 seed, I think that matters. I think that deserves a boatload of credit. So, Ashton Jeanty would still win the Heisman Trophy in my ballot. He had 169 yards rushing, 1 touchdown yesterday on 19 carries. So, 9 yards per carry. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. When everybody on the planet knows that you're getting the ball and you're still able to produce, that says a lot to me. I think that is impressive. I think you deserve a lot of credit. Ashton Jeanty has 27 touchdowns on the ground. That is an impressive stat. So I would put him at number 1. I would have Dillon Gabriel at number 2 and Cam Ward at number 3. I would sit down and probably think about it a little bit harder if the ballot was due today than having 1 more week of regular season games to look at. And I would consider Travis Hunter's candidacy a little bit more. But Cam Ward has Miami in the playoff hunt damn near single-handedly. And Dillon Gabriel had a bye week at a really bad time, because this is when you're supposed to kind of like really cement the fact that you are a Heisman Trophy candidate, a Heisman Trophy frontrunner. And he didn't have a game on Saturday. But that's what my Heisman Trophy ballot would look like. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.